Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today we'll be doing a review of the 1848 novel by Charles Dickens, Dealings with the Firm of Dombey and Son, Wholesale, Retail, and for Exportation, better known succinctly as Dombey and Son. Okay, this was the seventh full-length novel by Charles Dickens. This was written while he was in Switzerland for the period of a couple of years, and as we've kind of talked about in the most recent kind of Dickens reviews, this kind of came after a bit of a dry spell for him. Not necessarily commercially, but certainly as far as when we look at his long-term impact in the novels that he's remembered for, this was one of his less kind of lasting periods, just in general. And Dombey and Son, I think there are people who view this as kind of the turnaround for Dickens, or the beginning of the turnaround into his kind of later career where he produces a lot of his greatest works. And I can see that, but I do tend to believe that Dombey and Son has a lot in common with its 1840s counterparts. There's a lot of Old Curiosity Shop or Martin Chuzzlewit in there, Barnaby Rudge too. Really, the big kind of comparison I make with Barnaby Rudge especially is that Dombey and Son starts really slowly. Really, a lot of Dickens novels do, but I think Dombey and Son is very guilty of this. The first part of the novel has a lot of what I'm going to call Tiny Tim in it, and you're going to know exactly which character I'm referring to. It's a very important character early on in the book that feels like a real just kind of Tiny Tim repeat from A Christmas Carol. You kind of know exactly what direction the plot is going to go in once he's kind of described as this weak-bodied, feeble-bodied individual with a heart of gold and a wisdom beyond his years. I mean, you know what's going to happen. And the first maybe quarter of the novel kind of takes its time getting you to that outcome you expect. But once Tiny Tim is gone, in this example, the true heart of the novel's plot becomes really apparent, and that is where the pace really picks up. Florence Dombey is an interesting character. I don't know if I was head over heels in love with Florence as a character the whole time, but I do think that she is potentially Dickens' most fully fledged female character, certainly most fully fledged, full-born female protagonist at this point. And she really evolves, really develops herself over time, especially as the focus of the plot becomes centered around her journey. The character of Edith Granger, I'm a big fan of that character too. She feels underutilized on some level, but I think that's intentional because the whole point is that there's this distance between her and Florence that can't quite be bridged, and the reason for that distance has nothing to do with the two of them and has everything to do with the antagonists in this. There's kind of a pair of them. You have Mr. Dombey himself, Florence's father, and Mr. Carker, Dombey's assistant, who were kind of antagonists who are also, as it turns out, against each other. We have this little kind of betrayal, a little past the halfway point of the novel, that I think is very interesting. These characters, it's not necessarily that they are super compelling in and of themselves. I think they're intended to be stereotypes, but that stereotyping is the point. This novel talks a lot about themes of, I suppose you could say, toxic masculinity, this idea of kind of masculinity and men not necessarily relating to daughters, not wanting daughters to exist as much as they do sons. It's a difficult thing. It's something that I think this novel handles really well and really effectively, and in a way that is soul-crushing at times. There's some really intense emotional moments between Mr. Dombey and Florence, again, especially kind of later on in the book. I do want to kind of touch on the ending very briefly, because this novel does have what I would call a happy ending. In a lot of ways. In fact, I think in almost every way, it's a happy ending with one major exception. And I think really the question comes down to, is the ending deserved? And I struggle with that because it is such a positive ending, and at least one of the main villains gets such a chance to kind of redeem himself, is given such grace at the end that it feels a little bit too, it doesn't really feel earned, if I'm being perfectly honest. It doesn't entirely sit well with me. But the reason why it wasn't a major turnoff is because those ending scenes, the kind of turn, I guess you could say, that happens towards the end with one of the main characters, contains some of my favorite Charles Dickens writing to date. I mean, there is some beautiful prose going on here that I absolutely adore. And just the writing alone and the descriptions of the emotions being experienced are so vivid and so powerful that I think there was at least one moment where I had goosebumps reading it. So it was really powerful stuff. And so we kind of sit at the end with this novel that is noticeably uneven, has some incredibly strong moments that rank among anything that Dickens had written to that point. But you do have to kind of get through a lot to get there. I think the Penguin Classics version is about 800, 900 pages, and there's a lot of kind of not necessarily filler stuff, but you do have to trudge through a lot to get through the really good stuff. But what is excellent here is really excellent. So I understand where people are coming from when they say that this does feel like kind of the launching point for the later novels, which we will get to. I can definitely understand that perspective. But I will say that I think quality-wise, at least compared to the later Dickens novels that I've read so far, this reads a little bit closer to, again, your old curiosity shops, your Martin Chuzzlewitts. I definitely like this a substantial bit more than Barnaby Rudge, but you kind of get the sense of what I'm saying. This feels like more of a mid-tier Dickens novel rather than a top-tier one, although, of course, mid-tier Dickens is still very, very good. And with that said, I would heartily recommend it. It makes you think. It is a reflective novel, and there's a lot of heart behind it, even with kind of the uneven pacing and characterization sometimes. So that's it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. Tell a friend as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time, right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.